All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some pretty unsettling stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Psychology of influence.
Interesting stuff.
We've got excerpts from a book called The Manipulated Mind by Denise Winn. And let me tell you, this book does not shy away from the darker side of how our minds can be swayed.
It's interesting, isn't it, how that very word brainwashing tends to make people uncomfortable?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we tend to associate it with, these extreme scenarios uh, like prisoners of war or something like that. But the
Yeah.
reality is that, influence operates on a much more subtle level in our everyday lives.
It's kind of a scary thought, right?
Yeah.
That we might not be as in control of our thoughts and actions as we think.
Right.
Wynne kicks off the book with a chilling historical example, the case of Timothy Evans. He was wrongly convicted and hanged for murders committed by his neighbor, John Christie.
Yeah, this case is really a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be to external pressures.
Yeah.
Especially, in situations where we feel anxious or intimidated.
Evans was described as being easily flustered,
Right.
and he was absolutely terrified of Christie.
Oh, wow.
The police interrogation just amplified that fear, and they kept at him until he confessed to crimes he didn't commit.
Well, and what's fascinating here is how this case, while tragic, reveals this really fundamental aspect of human psychology.
Okay.
This power of guilt, fear, and confusion
Yeah.
to make us more suggestible. I mean, Evans, already in a heightened state of anxiety, was essentially pushed to a breaking point.
Right.
Where he was willing to admit to anything just to escape the pressure.
So what you're saying is it's not just about outright coercion.
Right.
It's about creating a psychological environment
Exactly.
where someone is more likely to comply, even if they know they're not being truthful.
Yeah.
Wynne draws a parallel to the techniques used by the Chinese communists on American POWs during the Korean War.
Right. They use prolonged stress isolation and this manipulation of guilt and anxiety to break down the prisoners' resistance and make them more receptive to propaganda.
It's pretty disturbing to think that these tactics, even without physical torture, can be so effective.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, where else do we see this kind of influence playing out?
Well, one area Wynn explores is psychotherapy.
Oh, okay.
Might seem like a surprising leap, but she raises a critical question. Can therapy, even with the best intentions, sometimes become a form of coercion?
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, we think of therapy as a safe space
Sure.
for healing and growth.
Yeah.
How could it possibly be coercive?
Well, it all boils down to the power dynamics inherent in the therapist-patient relationship. I mean, the therapist is seen as the expert, the authority figure,
Right.
while the patient is often in a vulnerable state seeking guidance and relief.
Sure.
So this power imbalance, even if unintended, can create an environment where the patient is more susceptible to the therapist's influence.
So it's not that therapists are intentionally manipulating their patients.
Right.
It's more about the subtle ways that their expertise and the patient's desire to get better can create a situation where the patient adopts the therapist's views,
Exactly.
even if they wouldn't have naturally come to those conclusions on their own.
Precisely. And Wynn points to research that shows how patients often unconsciously adopt their therapist's values and perspectives.
Wow.
There are even examples of patients starting to dream in the style their therapist practices or engaging in behaviors they previously denied.
Really?
Simply because the therapist suggested the possibility.
Wait, so you're saying that just the suggestion from a therapist can actually change someone's behavior?
Oh, it can happen. Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Do you think this is why some people become so dependent on their therapists?
It's certainly a factor.
Okay.
The patient's desire for relief, combined with the therapist's expertise,
Yeah.
can create a dynamic where the patient becomes increasingly reliant on the therapist's guidance, even for decisions that they could potentially make on their own.
Okay, so we've gone from a wrongful conviction to brainwashing tactics.
Yeah.
To the complexities of therapy.
Yeah.
Is there a common thread here?
Absolutely. What all these examples illustrate is the power of context and the subtle ways that our environment and the people in positions of authority can influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
So it's not just about overt manipulation.
Right.
It's about understanding how our vulnerabilities and the situations we find ourselves in can make us more susceptible to being swayed. Wynne uses another example that I found particularly fascinating, albeit a bit lighter.
Oh, yeah.
The case of decorated toilet paper.
Yes. The decorated toilet paper, a seemingly trivial example, but it perfectly illustrates how marketers tap into our psychology to create demand for things we didn't even know we needed.
I mean, who really needs toilet paper with flowers or puppies printed on it?
Right.
But somehow they manage to sell it.
They do.
Winn argues that this is a perfect example of how advertising has evolved
Yes.
from simply targeting demographics
Right.
to something much more sophisticated, psychographics.
Psychographics, it's all about understanding the psychology of your target audience.
Okay.
It's about going beyond demographics like age and income to delve into their deeper motivations, values, fears, and aspirations.
So instead of just saying, hey, everyone needs toilet paper,
Right.
they're saying, hey, the person who values luxury and wants to feel pampered, you deserve toilet paper that reflects your refined taste.
Exactly. They're creating a narrative that appeals to our emotions and desires, making us feel like the product is an extension of our identity,
Right.
rather than just a basic necessity.
It's amazing how they manage to make us feel like we need things that are, objectively speaking, completely unnecessary.
And that's the genius of advertising. It taps into our unconscious desires and fears, often without us even realizing it.
So they're playing on our insecurities,
Yes.
our need for approval, our desire to fit in.
Precisely. Think about the messages we're bombarded with every day.
Yeah.
You're not thin enough, you're not stylish enough, you don't have the right car, the right house, the right kind of toilet paper.
It's all about making us feel like we're lacking something, so we'll buy their product to fill that void.
And they do it through a variety of techniques.
Okay.
Repetition is key. We see the same ads over and over again. And eventually, those messages start to seep into our subconscious. They also use association, linking their products with celebrities or authority figures
Yeah.
to create a sense of credibility and desirability. And of course, there's the power of branding. I mean, we've all fallen for a brand name at some point, believing it signifies quality or prestige, even if the product itself is no different from a generic version.
It's almost like we're being conditioned to respond to these marketing messages, even if we're consciously aware of the tactics being used.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a rather controversial topic.
Oh.
Subliminal advertising.
Yeah.
Is it real? And is it ethical?
It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
While overt subliminal advertising, like flashing hidden messages in movies, has been largely debunked. Winn points to research suggesting that our brains might still be processing information on an unconscious level, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
So even if we're not seeing those blatant hidden messages, our brains might still be picking up on subtle cues and forming associations
Exactly.
that influence our behavior later on.
That's the idea.
She highlights the differences between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere is associated with logic and language,
Right.
while the right hemisphere is more intuitive
Yes.
and processes information on a more subconscious level.
Right.
So while we might be consciously distracted during commercials, our right brain could still be absorbing the imagery and messages, influencing our preferences and purchasing decisions later on.
It's possible.
So even if we think we're immune to advertising because we're not paying attention, our brains might be working against us, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it, this idea that we're constantly being influenced on a level we're not even aware of.
It is, and this concept of unconscious influence extends beyond advertising. Winn also explores how institutions, particularly those Goffman called total institutions, exert a powerful influence on individuals.
Total institutions, but what exactly does that mean?
Total institutions are environments like prisons, mental hospitals, and even some boarding schools,
Okay.
where individuals are separated from the outside world and subject to strict rules and routines.
So it's about creating a controlled environment
Yeah.
where individuals are essentially stripped of their autonomy
Mm-hmm.
and forced to conform to the institution's norms and expectations.
Exactly. Winn argues that these institutions shape behavior through a combination of controlled environments, rewards, and punishments, and the fostering of dependence on the system itself.
It's almost like they create a mini-society
Right.
with its own set of rules and values,
Yeah.
designed to reshape the individual's identity and behavior. Winn uses a rather chilling example, a juvenile delinquent reform program called SEED
Oh, yeah.
that was eventually shut down due to concerns about its methods.
SEED used tactics like isolation, intense peer pressure, and even an informant system to enforce conformity among its participants.
Oh, wow.
While the intention may have been to reform delinquent behavior, the methods used raise serious ethical questions about the use of psychological manipulation and the potential for lasting harm.
It makes you wonder about the long-term consequences of being subjected to this kind of intense control, even if it's done with good intentions. Does it truly reform behavior, or does it simply create a sense of learned helplessness and dependence?
That's a crucial question, and this concept of institutionalization,
Yeah.
the idea that prolonged exposure to a controlled environment can lead to dependence and a loss of individual initiative, has implications that go far beyond prisons and reform programs. Winn connects this to the historical treatment of mental patients, highlighting the dangers of depriving individuals of stimulation and autonomy.
So even if the intention is to help creating an environment where individuals are constantly being controlled,
Right.
can actually be detrimental in the long run.
Precisely, it's a delicate balance. While structure and guidance can be beneficial, too much control can stifle creativity, critical thinking, and the development of self-reliance.
Okay, so we've seen how influence can play out in some pretty intense situations, from police interrogations
Yeah.
to brainwashing tactics to the inner workings of total institutions. It all paints a rather bleak picture.
It does.
Is there any hope for resisting these powerful forces?
There is. Winn highlights the case of Turkish POWs in Korea who successfully resisted brainwashing attempts through strong group cohesion, discipline, and even humor.
So even in the face of extreme psychological pressure, resistance is possible.
It is.
But how do they do it? What made them different from other prisoners who succumbed to the influence?
The Turkish POWs deliberately maintained high morale. They supported each other, refused to give in to despair, and even used humor to deflect the psychological pressure. They maintained a sense of perspective, recognizing that their captors were trying to manipulate them, and they refused to play into their hands.
So it's about maintaining a sense of self. It's a strong internal compass even when external forces are trying to break you down.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that humor can be a powerful tool for resilience.
Yeah.
By refusing to take themselves or their situation too seriously, they were able to maintain a sense of psychological distance from their captors' attempts to control them.
That's an inspiring story.
Yeah.
It shows that even in the most dire circumstances, the human spirit can prevail. But how do we apply those lessons to our everyday lives? I mean, most of us aren't facing brainwashing attempts or being held captive in total institutions, but we are constantly being bombarded with messages and influences
Right.
that are trying to shape our thoughts and behaviors.
Yeah.
How do we resist those more subtle forms of manipulation?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
By cultivating a discerning mind, questioning authority, and being aware of our own vulnerabilities, we can become more resistant to manipulation.
So it's about being aware of the tactics used to influence us and actively engaging our critical thinking skills to evaluate information,
Right.
question motives, and make conscious choices rather than simply reacting to external pressure.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that complete immunity to influence may be impossible.
Right.
But understanding the tactics used empowers us to be more discerning consumers of information and more assertive in protecting our autonomy.
Winn's exploration of the psychology of influence offers a fascinating and at times unsettling glimpse into the workings of the human mind. But ultimately, it's a call to action, to be aware, to be critical, and to actively engage in shaping our own thoughts and actions rather than passively allowing ourselves to be manipulated.
It's a reminder that our minds are both powerful and vulnerable, and it's up to us to cultivate the mental resilience needed to navigate the complex world of influence and make truly independent choices.
This is where we wrap up part 1 of our deep dives in part 2. We'll continue our exploration of the manipulated mind, delving deeper into the subtle ways our environments shape our behavior and the steps we can take to become more resistant to manipulation. You know, it's amazing how much of our behavior is driven by things we're not even consciously aware of.
Oh, yeah.
In the last part, we talked about how external pressures and authority figures can influence us.
Right.
But Winn also delves into how our environment, even the seemingly insignificant details, can shape our actions.
It's like we're constantly being nudged in certain directions by
Yeah.
cues and triggers that we don't even register consciously.
Right, like how the layout of a grocery store is designed to make us spend more, or how the colors and lighting in a restaurant can influence our mood and appetite.
Exactly.
It's fascinating and a little bit creepy to think about how much of our behavior is being shaped by these subconscious cues.
Well, Winn connects this to the concept of conditioning.
Okay.
The idea that we learn to associate certain stimuli with specific responses. Remember Pavlov's dogs?
Oh yeah, classic example.
They were conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell
Right.
because they learned to associate the bell with food.
But you're saying that humans are susceptible to this kind of conditioning too?
Absolutely. We're constantly forming these subconscious associations between things in our environment and our emotional responses. I mean, think about how certain smells can trigger vivid memories,
Yeah.
or how a particular song can transport you back to a specific time and place.
Right.
These are all examples of conditioning at work.
So it's not just about conscious decision-making. Our past experiences and the associations we've formed over time are constantly influencing our present behavior.
Hmm.
That makes the whole idea of subliminal advertising even more intriguing. Even if we're not consciously registering those hidden messages, our brains might be forming those subconscious associations anyway.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial point that Wynn makes:
Okay.
the importance of self-awareness, particularly understanding our own vulnerabilities. I mean, we all have our weaknesses, our insecurities, our emotional triggers, and those who are skilled at influencing others know exactly how to exploit those vulnerabilities to get what they want.
It's like those salespeople who can somehow sense your hesitation and then zero in on it using just the right words and gestures to push your buttons and close the deal. Or those charismatic politicians who can rally a crowd with their speeches, appealing to people's emotions rather than their logic.
Precisely. They understand how to tap into our deepest fears and desires, often without us even realizing it, which is why self-awareness is so crucial.
Okay.
The more we understand about our own triggers and vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate us.
So it's about being able to step back and observe our own reactions, to ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? Is this a genuine response, or am I being influenced by something outside of myself?
Exactly. It's about developing a healthy sense of skepticism, not to be cynical or distrustful, but to be able to critically evaluate the information and influences coming at us.
So how do we become more discerning? I mean, we're constantly being bombarded with messages and persuasive tactics from the media to advertising to social media. It's hard to know what to trust.
Well, one key is to develop our critical thinking skills.
Okay.
It's about questioning everything, not just blindly accepting information at face value. Look for evidence, consider different perspectives, and be willing to challenge assumptions.
That makes sense. It's about being an active participant in the information we consume
Right.
rather than just passively absorbing whatever's being thrown at us.
Exactly. And another crucial skill is emotional detachment.
Okay.
When we're emotionally invested in something,
Mm-hmm.
we're more likely to be swayed by our feelings rather than our logic. Learning to step back and detach ourselves from the emotional pull of a situation can help us see things more clearly and make more rational decisions.
That's easier said than done, though, right?
Uh,
Especially when it's something we care deeply about.
It is, but it's a skill that can be cultivated with practice. It's about recognizing when our emotions are running high and taking a step back to allow ourselves time to cool off and process the situation before reacting.
So it's about creating space between the stimulus and our response.
Yeah.
So we can make a more conscious choice about how we want to react.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that our emotions, while powerful, don't always reflect the full picture. Sometimes it's necessary to detach from the emotional intensity of the moment to see things more clearly.
You know, one thing that struck me in the book was Wynn's emphasis on the importance of humor as a defense mechanism against manipulation. It seems counterintuitive, but she argues that humor can actually help us maintain perspective and resist the emotional pull of persuasive tactics.
It might seem surprising, but humor can be incredibly powerful. It allows us to see the absurdity in certain situations, to deflate pomposity, and to resist taking ourselves too seriously. When we can laugh at something, it loses its power to control us.
I love that it's like those times when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed and then someone cracks a joke and suddenly the tension just melts away. It's a reminder that not everything has to be so serious all the time.
Exactly. And that ability to find humor, even in difficult situations, can be a sign of resilience, a way of reclaiming our power in the face of adversity.
So it sounds like resisting influence isn't about building up some impenetrable mental wall,
Right.
but about developing a more flexible, adaptable mindset that can navigate the complexities of the world around us. It's about being aware, being critical, being emotionally intelligent, and yes, even finding the humor in it all.
Well said. It's a lifelong process of self-discovery and self-awareness. And as Wynn reminds us, the more we understand about the psychology of influence, the better equipped we are to make conscious, informed choices and live more authentic, self-directed lives.
Okay, so we've talked about how our environment and our own vulnerabilities can make us susceptible to manipulation. We've also explored some strategies for resisting influence, like critical thinking, emotional detachment, and humor.
And in part 3, we'll shift gears and delve into some real-world examples of how these principles of influence play out in various settings, from politics and religion to cults and even our personal relationships.
All right, so we've explored how our minds can be swayed, by external pressures, by authority figures, and even our environment.
Right.
Now, in this final part, let's look at how these principles of influence play out in some real-world scenarios.
Okay.
Wynn takes us into the territory of politics, religion, and even cults.
Oh, yeah.
Areas where the stakes can be incredibly high.
Yeah, these are the domains where the lines between persuasion and manipulation can get really blurry.
Right.
It's fascinating how groups and individuals can use these psychological tactics to gain followers and exert control.
Wynn's discussion of cults really got to me. It's terrifying to think how seemingly ordinary people can get so caught up in these groups, often giving up their autonomy and even their families.
Well, cults often target people who are feeling lost or vulnerable, searching for meaning and belonging. They offer a sense of community purpose and a charismatic leader who promises answers and enlightenment.
It's like they create this alternate reality
Oh.
where the group's beliefs are the only truth, and anyone who questions those beliefs is seen as a threat.
Exactly. And that's where techniques like isolation and thought control come in. Cults often limit their members' contact with the outside world, controlling the information they receive and the people they interact with.
Right.
They create a closed system where the group's ideology is constantly reinforced, making it difficult for individuals to think critically or consider alternative perspectives.
Wynn also talks about love bombing,
Yeah.
where new recruits are showered with affection and attention. It's like they're being lured in with this intense feeling of acceptance and belonging.
It's a powerful tactic because it preys on our fundamental human need for connection. By creating this intense, almost familial bond, cults make it incredibly difficult for members to leave, even if they start having doubts. I mean, it's not just about rejecting a set of beliefs, it's about severing ties with people they've come to rely on and trust.
It's almost like a hostage situation.
Yeah.
But instead of physical captivity,
Yeah.
it's emotional captivity. And it makes you wonder, are these tactics limited to cults? Or do we see similar patterns in other groups and organizations?
Well, it's not just cults. Anytime you have a group with a strong ideology, a charismatic leader, and a system for controlling information and behavior, there's potential for undue influence.
So how do we recognize when healthy group dynamics cross the line
You're right.
into something more coercive or manipulative? What are the red flags?
Well, one key indicator is dogma, the idea that the group's beliefs are absolute and unquestionable.
Yeah.
Any dissent or questioning is met with hostility or punishment.
That makes sense. It's like they're shutting down any possibility of critical thinking or independent thought.
Exactly. Another red flag is isolation, both physical and emotional. When a group discourages its members from interacting with the outside world or forming relationships with people who don't share the group's beliefs, that's a sign that something might be amiss.
It's like they're trying to create a bubble where their ideology is the only reality.
And of course, the presence of a charismatic leader who demands absolute loyalty and obedience is a huge warning sign.
Right.
Healthy groups encourage critical thinking and open dialogue, not blind allegiance to a single individual.
It's scary how easily we can be drawn into these dynamics, whether it's a cult, a political party, or even just a tight-knit social group.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder to be vigilant and to trust our gut instincts if something feels off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also important to remember that influence isn't always a bad thing.
Right.
I mean, we influence each other all the time in positive ways. Think about teachers who inspire their students, mentors who guide young people, or activists who mobilize others to fight for social justice.
That's a good point.
Oh.
It's not about becoming completely immune to influence.
Right.
It's probably impossible anyway. It's about being aware of the tactics being used. It's both positive and negative, and making conscious choices about who and what we allow to influence us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that influence is a part of human interaction. But it's up to us to be discerning and to use our critical thinking skills to evaluate the intentions and motives of those who are trying to sway us.
Well, this deep dive into the psychology of influence has been fascinating and at times a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important conversation to have.
It is.
The more we understand about how our minds can be swayed, the better equipped we are to make choices that are aligned with our values.
Right.
And to resist those who would seek to manipulate us for their own gain.
Well said. It's a journey of self-discovery and continuous learning.
Yeah.
The more we understand about ourselves and the world around us, the more empowered we become to navigate the complex landscape of influence and live authentic, meaningful lives.
So as we wrap up our exploration of the manipulated mind, we encourage you to keep these ideas in mind as you move through the world. Pay attention to the subtle ways you're being influenced, both positively and negatively. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and trust your instincts, and remember the power to make conscious, informed choices ultimately rests with you.